Chapter 1. The Notice Board. The listing said, Psychic readings, $50 an hour. Results may vary. Isolde Baromir had written that last part herself because she believed in managing expectations, and because the one time she'd left it out, a man had threatened to sue her over a stock tip that, to be fair, had been correct, just 3 weeks early. She was eating cereal at her kitchen table when her phone rang. Not her personal phone, the work phone, the one she'd bought at a gas station and taped a sticker of a crystal ball onto because she thought it was funny. Nobody else thought it was funny. Baromir readings, she said, around a mouthful of Cheerios. Good evening. I am calling on behalf of a diplomatic host who requires a psychic consultant for a summit of some significance. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, and sounded like it had been practicing formality since before electricity. Isolde swallowed. What kind of significance? International, multi-century. The engagement would span approximately 5 days, room and board provided. The host's estate is somewhat remote. Uh-huh. And how did you find my listing? A notice board. Which notice board? A pause. The kind of pause that suggested the caller was not accustomed to follow-up questions. The electronic one, on the internet. Craigslist. If you insist. She should have hung up. She should have finished her cereal, watched the rest of her show, and gone to bed at a reasonable hour, like a person who made sensible decisions. But the thing about Isolde Baromir was that she had been seeing things since she was 7 years old. Real things, impossible things, things that came true whether she wanted them to or not. And in 22 years of having a gift nobody believed in, nobody had ever called her and said the word multi-century like they meant it. 5 days, she said. At $50 an hour, that's... The host has authorized a flat rate of $5,000, non-negotiable. She put down her cereal. I'll be there. The estate was not what she'd expected. She'd expected rich person weird. A McMansion with a meditation room, maybe some crystals on the mantelpiece that cost more than her car. What she got was a 17th century manor house at the end of a private road, lit by what appeared to be actual gas lights at 11:30 at night. The man who met her at the door was tall, pale, impeccably dressed, and moved like someone who had been organizing complicated events for longer than most countries had existed. Miss Baromir, I am Dylan. We spoke on the telephone. You said notice board instead of Craigslist. I stand by my phrasing. He held the door wider. This way, please. The interior was the kind of house where the furniture came from 4 different centuries, and none of it clashed because someone with an extraordinary eye and an inhuman amount of time had arranged it that way. The candles were real. There were a lot of them. Is the power out? Isolde asked. The house predates the grid. We have electricity in the kitchens and the staff quarters. The formal rooms are candlelit by preference. Whose preference? The host's. He finds fluorescent lighting aggressive. What does he find non-aggressive? Candlelight, moonlight, the absence of light entirely. Great, that's not ominous at all. I assure you, Miss Baromir, there is nothing ominous about the estate. You have portraits in this corridor that are older than my country. The portraits are decorative. That one's watching me. That is Sir Edwin Winterbourne. He has been watching everyone since 1740. It is his only remaining hobby. They walked past Sir Edwin. Isolde could already feel it, the low hum of something ancient and watchful, the pressure in the air that meant she was near something that was not entirely human. Her readings had taught her to recognize that pressure. It usually meant someone in the room had died and come back, or had never been alive in the way that most people understood alive. Her hands were trembling by the time Dylan opened the study door. You're nervous, Dylan observed. You're very pale. I am naturally fair-complexioned. You're very pale and you haven't breathed since we got inside. Dylan paused. I see you're going to be observant. How inconvenient. Nikolai Winterbourne was standing at his desk, reviewing summit preparations, and the first thing Isolde noticed about him was that he was not breathing. Not in a distressed way, in the way that a person who does not need to breathe simply doesn't bother when there's nobody around to perform for. He was tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured, and looked roughly 32 in a way that was too precise to be natural. His skin was pale without being sickly, luminous, cold-toned, like marble that someone had given cheekbones. His eyes were dark gray, the kind of gray that in certain light shifted to something closer to silver, and they were currently fixed on a seating chart with the focus of someone who had been managing diplomatic crises since before the invention of the telephone. Miss Barrowmere, he said without looking up. Thank you for coming. I trust Dylan explained the engagement. He said you need a psychic for a summit, a performance. Precisely. The tradition requires a court reader at diplomatic gatherings. It's theater. I need someone who can sit in a chair, look mysterious, and say things about the future that are sufficiently vague to impress and sufficiently meaningless to cause no harm. He looked up. Can you do that? You want me to be fake. I want you to be convincing. I'm not fake. No one is asking you to commit to the bit permanently, Miss Barrowmere. I'm asking you to sit in a chair for 5 days and say things like, a great change approaches. Can you manage that? She should have said yes. She should have taken the $5,000, sat in the chair, said vague things about destiny, and gone home. But the thing about Isolde Barrowmere, the thing that had gotten her into trouble since she was 7 years old, was that she couldn't turn it off. Give me your hand, she said. He blinked. It was the first time since she'd entered the room that his composure had shifted at all. I beg your pardon? Your hand, for the reading. I'll give you a sample so you know what you're getting. He looked at Dylan. Dylan's expression suggested this was not in the brief. Nikolai extended his hand with the careful patience of someone who has endured worse indignities than parlor tricks. Isolde took his hand. She went white. It hit her like a wave, not the gentle kind, the kind that drags you under. Centuries. She could feel centuries. The cold weight of decades stacked on decades. The faces of people who had died and been mourned, and been forgotten, and been mourned again when he found their names in old letters. Blood. Not metaphorical blood, real blood. The taste and the need and the restraint that cost him something every single day of his existence. The predator that lived behind those gray eyes, patient and ancient and still as stone. And then, clear as a bell, sharp as broken glass. The chair. An empty chair in this very study with a cushion on it that he kept replacing. And a future, his future, that he couldn't see but she could. Clear as anything she'd ever seen. She let go of his hand. She was shaking. You're going to fall in love, she said. Her voice was not steady. Nikolai stared at her. I beg your pardon? That's the most immediate thing. You're going to fall in love. It's going to change everything. With whom? I can't see her face. She could. She absolutely could. It was hers. But she's going to change everything. That's vague. Prophecy is vague. She was still trembling, but her voice was steadying. Because she was a professional. And professionals did not have breakdowns in front of clients. Even clients who were, she was processing this part slowly, not human. Also, your man Dylan is going to spill wine on the Ivory Court ambassador's wife tonight. Red wine. At exactly 8:47. You should probably prevent that. Nikolai looked at Dylan. Dylan looked at Nikolai. I have never spilled anything in 400 years, Dylan said. At 8:47 p.m., during the opening reception, Dylan turned to offer a glass of Bordeaux to the Ivory Court ambassador's wife. and his elbow caught the edge of a candelabra that had been moved 6 inches to the left by a member of the catering staff who had not been told about the candelabra. The wine went everywhere. Nikolai stared at Isolde across the reception hall. She was standing by the hors d'oeuvres table with a plate of cheese and an expression that said, quite clearly, "Told you." He found her afterward, in the corridor outside the great hall, still eating cheese. "How?" "I told you. I'm not fake." "You were supposed to be fake." "Sorry to inconvenience you with actual powers." You saw Dylan spilling wine. From a handshake." "I saw a lot of things from that handshake. The wine was the most urgent." She ate another piece of cheese. "For what it's worth, I also see that the Ash Court is going to propose a trade amendment tomorrow that's actually a power grab. You should read Clause 7 carefully." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, closed it. "You're doing the thing," she said, "where you stop breathing." "I don't need to breathe." "That's not the reassuring answer you think it is." He turned on his heel and walked away. She watched him go. He moved like something that had been dangerous for a very long time and had gotten tired of proving it. She ate the last piece of cheese. Her hand was still cold where she'd touched his. Later, in the study, Dylan poured Nikolai a glass of something old and dark. "She's real," Nikolai said. "She appears to be, sir." "I hired a psychic from Craigslist, and she's real." In my defense, the listing was very professional. She had reviews. She had reviews. 4.7 stars. One dissatisfied customer regarding a stock tip, but the timeline discrepancy was within acceptable parameters. Nikolai drank. He did not need to drink. The warmth of the brandy sat in his chest like a memory of being alive. "She said I'm going to fall in love." Dylan paused in the act of straightening a stack of summit documents. "Did she specify with whom?" "She said she couldn't see the face." "And do you believe her?" Nikolai looked at the chair, the one by the window with the cushion. He'd been replacing that cushion for decades. He'd never thought about why. "I believe she saw Dylan spill wine at 8:47, he said. "That was an accident." "She predicted it to the minute." "An accident she predicted to the minute," Dylan amended, without changing his expression. "Shall I update the summit security protocols to account for a genuine psychic, or shall we continue pretending she's theater?" "Both," Nikolai said. "She's theater until I understand what she is." "Very good, sir. Shall I also update the Craigslist listing? Perhaps a disclaimer about actual supernatural abilities?" "Cancel the listing." "The listing is how we found her." "I'm aware, Dylan. That's the problem." Chapter 2. The Readings. By the second day of the summit, Isolde Baromir had become the most popular person in the building, and she was handling it with the energy of someone doing tax prep at gunpoint. "You're going to lose your left cufflink," she told the Ash Court delegate. "Third corridor, near the portrait of the woman with the dog." He scoffed. She didn't care. The cufflink was on the floor of the third corridor by noon. "Your husband is lying about Clause 7, she told the Ivory Court ambassador's wife, who was still upset about the wine. "Not about the wording, about the intent. He knows what it means." The ambassador's wife stopped being upset about the wine. "Your favorite vintage is about to be discontinued," she told a 600-year-old vampire from the Birch Court who had been alive since the Reformation. "You should order a case. 2, if you plan to share." She gave these readings from a chair in the East Salon, which Dylan had set up with a small table, a carafe of water, and a velvet cloth that she had not requested. I don't need the cloth, she told Dylan. The cloth adds gravitas. I told a man he'd lose a cufflink. Where's the gravitas in that? The gravitas is in being correct about the cufflink, Miss Barrowmere. She did the readings one by one. Touch, vision, information. Delivered with the brisk efficiency of a dental hygienist telling someone they needed to floss more. You're going to have a difficult conversation with your sire this week. I recommend before Thursday. Do you want the extended reading or just the basics? What's in the extended reading? More bad news, but with context. Just the basics. Smart. She let go of his hand and reached for her water glass. Next. The next delegate was a woman who had been alive since the Restoration and looked like she had opinions about it. Your niece is going to ask you for money, Isolde said, after a 3-second reading. Say yes. She's going to use it well. I don't have a niece. You will by March. The woman stared. Isolde was already reaching for the next hand. A young vampire, maybe 80, sat down with the nervous energy of someone who wanted very badly to be told something good. You're going to be fine, Isolde said. Really? No, but you're going to handle it well, and that's better. She paused. Also, stop lending money to Counselor Roth. He's not going to pay you back. He hasn't paid anyone back since 1923. How do you know about Counselor Roth? I know about everyone. It's exhausting. Next. The readings went on for 3 hours. By the end of it, she had a headache, a reputation, and the dawning realization that being the only real psychic in a building full of immortal predators was less like a job and more like being the only person at a party who could see that the house was on fire. Nikolai watched from across the room. He had been watching for 2 hours and he had not moved from his position by the window, and Dylan, who had known him for 4 centuries, recognized this particular quality of stillness as the kind that preceded either a strategic breakthrough or a personal catastrophe. You're staring, sir. I'm observing. You've been observing for 123 minutes. I'm being thorough. You're being conspicuous. 3 delegates have asked me if you're unwell. Nikolai didn't answer. He watched Isolde tell a 700-year-old pureblood that her estate manager was embezzling, and the pureblood was nodding as though she'd always suspected. She's good, Dylan said. She's telling the Baroness her staff are stealing. She's telling the Baroness the truth. There is a difference. Dylan straightened the drink tray. Also, her heartbeat has been elevated since the 2nd reading. She's frightened. I know. You know because you can hear it. I know because I've been listening to it for 2 hours. You've been listening to her heartbeat for 2 hours. Don't say it like that. I said it exactly as you said it, sir. I simply repeated your words. You repeated them with inflection. I am incapable of inflection. I have been told this many times. Dylan picked up an empty glass. She is frightened, and she is handling it by being professional. You might consider acknowledging that. I'm not going to acknowledge that. You're going to find her in the kitchen in approximately 45 minutes and tell her she can leave. She won't leave. You will both pretend this was a satisfying conversation. Are you a psychic now? No, sir. I simply know you. He found her during the dinner break. She was in the kitchen, the part of the house with electric lights, eating bread and staring at the wall. Okay, are frightened, he said from the doorway. She didn't turn around. I'm managing it. That's not the same thing. For me it is. He came into the kitchen. He moved carefully, the way he'd learned to move around humans who knew what he was. Slowly, deliberately, no sudden changes in direction. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table. It was an ordinary wooden table. The kitchen staff had gone to bed. When did you know? He asked. What I am, When I touched your hand, the first reading. She tore off a piece of bread. 700 years of not being human hits you like a truck. You didn't say anything. I was busy predicting wine disasters. You were deflecting. She looked at him. Yes, I was deflecting. I've been seeing impossible things since I was 7 years old, and nobody has ever believed me, and then I walk into a house full of vampires, and everything I've ever seen suddenly makes a horrible kind of sense, and I am managing it. With bread. He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. She could hear it because he didn't make any sound at all. No breath, no heartbeat, no fidgeting. Nobody believed you, he said. My mother thought I had an overactive imagination. My therapist thought I was anxious. My college roommate thought I was doing a bit. She tore the bread into smaller pieces. I once told a man on the subway that his wife was pregnant before she knew. He called security. And you kept doing readings. I kept doing readings. She looked at the bread, because the alternative was pretending I couldn't see what I could see, and I tried that for about 4 years, and it was the worst 4 years of my life. He understood that. 700 years of being what he was, and the moments that had cost him most were the ones where he'd pretended otherwise. For what it's worth, he said, you are the first person I have met in a very long time who is exactly what they claim to be. She looked at him. That might be the nicest thing a vampire has ever said to me. How many vampires have spoken to you? Including you? All of them, apparently. You can leave, he said. The door is open. I'll pay for the full engagement. I'm not leaving. The offer has no conditions. I'm not leaving, Nikolai. Why? She looked at him across the table. His gray eyes were very still. He hadn't blinked since he'd sat down. The candlelight from the adjacent corridor caught the angle of his jaw and made the shadows deeper, colder, more precise than any human shadow had a right to be. Because you haven't asked me the real question yet, she said. He didn't ask, not yet. She ate her bread. He watched her eat it with an expression that Dylan, had he been present, would have described in his private journal as the beginning of the end. Stop reading me, he said at the third day's morning session. They were in the East Salon. She was between delegates. He was standing near the fireplace, doing a reasonable impression of a man who was not paying attention to her, which she had already identified as his primary defense mechanism. I'm not reading you, you're just obvious. I'm the vampire king, I'm not obvious. You eat dinner alone every night looking at an empty chair. That's not psychic, that's sad. The muscle at his jaw worked once. The chair is decoratively placed. It has a cushion on it. You keep a cushion on an empty chair, that's not decor. That's hope. He looked at the chair. She was right. He'd been replacing that cushion for 47 years. He'd never asked himself why. He'd simply noticed when it wore thin and ordered a new one, the way a person maintains a garden path they never use but can't bring themselves to let grow over. Can you see who sits in it? He asked. Quietly, without the managed register. Just a man who had been alone for a long time, asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. I told you, she said, I can't see her face. Can you see if she stays? That part's up to you. He turned and walked to the window. She watched the set of his shoulders, rigid, controlled, the posture of someone who had mastered every muscle in his body across 7 centuries, and was currently losing control of one conversation with a woman he'd hired from a notice board. The next delegate sat down. She gave them their reading. She didn't look at him again for the rest of the session, but she could feel him watching her. You didn't need psychic powers for that. Chapter 3. The Things She Sees. The cat appeared on day 3. Not literally, figuratively. In the middle of a perfectly ordinary conversation about the summit's closing ceremonies, Isolde's vision flickered and she saw it. A gray tabby, sitting on Nikolai's desk, knocking his inkwell to the floor while he watched with the resigned devotion of a man who had already lost the battle. "You're going to get a cat," she said. Nikolai looked up from the treaty he was reviewing. "I beg your pardon?" "A cat. Gray tabby. It's going to knock things off your desk." "I don't want a cat." "The cat doesn't care what you want." "I'm aware that cats don't care what anyone wants. That's precisely why I don't want one." "You're going to name it Gregory." He stared at her. "I am not going to name a cat Gregory." "You absolutely are." Gregory is a dignified name for a dignified creature. Cats are not dignified. Gregory is going to sleep on your treaty documents. Then Gregory is going to be rehomed. Gregory is going to sleep on your treaty documents and you're going to let him, because he purrs when you're working, and it's the first sound in your study that isn't silence in 47 years, and you're not going to give that up. He went very still. She hadn't meant to say that much. The visions came out sometimes before she could stop them, and the ones about him were sharper than anyone else's, more loaded with a future that kept insisting she pay attention. 47 years, he said. That's how long the study has been quiet. He went back to the treaty. She could see the vein at his temple, a ghost memory of a pulse that wasn't there, tightening with the effort of not asking follow-up questions about either the cat or the silence. She kept doing it. She couldn't help it. Her visions of his future came unsolicited and specific, and deeply, aggressively mundane. "You're going to burn toast next Thursday." "I don't eat toast. I don't eat anything. I am a vampire." "You're going to try. There's going to be smoke." "Why would I try to make toast?" "Because she asks for it." He went very still. "She?" he said. "The woman in the chair." He didn't speak for a long time. The silence in the room was the kind he made, not the kind she was used to. No fidgeting, no shifting weight. Just the absolute absence of involuntary sound from a body that had stopped being involuntary 7 centuries ago. "You keep saying, she, like you know who she is," he said. "I keep saying she because that's what the visions show me. And the visions show me making toast. Badly. Very badly. There's a lot of smoke. Dylan is going to suggest a fire extinguisher. You're going to tell him the situation is under control. The situation is not under control. I have survived 700 years. I can manage bread and heat." The toast disagrees. So does the smoke detector. "I don't have a smoke detector." "You will by Thursday." On the 4th evening of the summit, she found the blanket. She'd been cold all week. His rooms ran cold because he ran cold. Body temperature somewhere around 15 degrees. Cold enough that the air in his private study had a permanent chill, like a room where someone had left the window open in November. She hadn't said anything about it. She was a guest. She was managing. But when she came back from the evening session, there was a blanket on the chair. His chair, the one with the cushion. A wool blanket, deep blue, folded precisely on the seat as though it had always been there. "Dylan," she said, "did you put this here?" "I did not." "Did Nikolai?" "His lordship does not discuss his domestic arrangements with me." "Dylan, I will say that his lordship asked me for the name of a supplier in Edinburgh at approximately 2 o'clock this afternoon. I will also say that a courier arrived at 4. And I will further say that his lordship entered the study at 4:15 and emerged at 4:16, which is not long enough to have done anything except place a single folded object on a single chair. He ordered me a blanket from Edinburgh." He ordered a blanket. Where it ended up is, I am told, a coincidence. A coincidence. His lordship was very clear on this point. The blanket is for the room, not for a person. The room is cold. He has noticed that the room is cold. He has, apparently, only just noticed this after 700 years. The room is cold because he is cold. I did not point this out to him. I value my position. She sat down. She wrapped the blanket around herself. It was warm in the way that expensive wool is warm. Immediately, completely, without reservation. When Nikolai came into the study 20 minutes later, he didn't mention the blanket. She didn't mention it either. He sat at his desk. She sat in the chair. The candles burned. For a while, neither of them spoke. She could hear the silence that he made, the absence of breath, of heartbeat, of the small, involuntary sounds that living things produce. It should have been unsettling. It was, instead, the quietest she'd been in weeks. "You're not reading right now," he said, without looking up from his papers. "I'm always reading. I can't turn it off." "What do you see?" "Right now? You're going to spill ink on that treaty in about 4 minutes. You should move the inkwell." He moved the inkwell. "Also, Dylan is going to come in and ask about the morning schedule, and you're going to tell him to reschedule the Birch Court meeting to after lunch." "I haven't decided to do that." "You will. Their delegate ate something that disagreed with him. He won't be in shape for morning negotiations." "Vampires don't eat." "He ate something out of politeness. It was a mistake." Nikolai looked at her. "You see the daily schedules of every person in this building?" "Not every person, just the ones near me. And you." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Mostly you." He was quiet for a moment. "Why mostly me?" "I don't know. The visions of you are clearer, sharper, like the future is trying to get my attention." He didn't say anything to that, but his hand on the desk went very still. "You moved the candles," she said. "I adjusted the arrangement." "You moved them closer to the chair." "The East Salon has better lighting. I simply replicated the configuration." "You replicated the configuration." "For consistency." She looked at him over the top of the blanket. He looked at his desk. The tips of his ears, the very tips, were the same shade of pale they always were, because vampires have no circulation. But his jaw was tight, and his hand on the desk was perfectly, precisely still in the way that meant he was controlling every muscle in his body to avoid giving something away. She pulled the blanket tighter. "Thank you," she said, "for the consistency." He didn't answer. But his hand relaxed, one finger at a time, and she watched it happen. And she knew, not from her powers, just from looking, that something had shifted. That night, his hunger surfaced. She noticed because his jaw had been tight for an hour, and because he'd stopped pretending to breathe, and because he was watching her move from the chair to the bookshelf with a focus that was sharper than it had been an hour ago. "You need to feed," she said. He went very still. The predator kind of still. "How did you know?" "I don't need powers for that. Your jaw's been tight for an hour, and you haven't blinked, and you're watching me cross the room like you're counting something." "I'm not counting." "You're doing the thing where your eyes go darker. They were gray an hour ago, now they're silver." "You've been cataloging my eye color." "You've been cataloging my pulse. We're even." He stood up. The movement was controlled, too controlled. "I apologize. I'll handle it." "Don't apologize. Go. I'll be here when you get back." "You don't have to stay." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Also, I already saw that you come back in about an hour looking calmer. So I'm going to read this book and pretend I'm not thinking about it." "You're thinking about it." "I think about everything. It's the whole psychic thing. Go." He looked at her. The gray of his eyes had shifted, not to red, not to anything dramatic, but to something deeper, a shade of silver dark that was not the color human eyes came in. The predator was close to the surface, and he was holding it with the discipline of 700 years, and she could see the cost of that discipline in the white of his knuckles. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm always a little afraid." I'm also always here. Both things can be true. He left. She sat in the chair and pulled the blanket around herself and waited. Her heart was beating fast. She could hear it in the quiet he'd left behind. And then the vision hit. Not his future this time, hers. A flash, sharp as glass. Herself, sitting in this same chair, in this same room, but different. Her skin pale, her hands still. Her heartbeat gone. The warmth that defined her, the warmth he kept arranging blankets and candles around, absent. She was cold, the way he was cold. And the blanket was still on the chair, but she didn't need it. And the contrast between them was gone, because there was nothing left to contrast. She gasped. The vision cleared. Her heart was hammering. She pulled the blanket tighter and didn't tell anyone what she'd seen. He came back an hour later. Calmer, steadier. His eyes were gray again. Better? She said. Yes. He sat down at his desk. He didn't look at her for a long time. Then, most people would have left the room. Most people can't see the future. I already knew you'd come back. Did you see that in a reading? No, I saw it in your face. When you stood up, the first thing you did was look at the chair. You were making sure it was still occupied. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see the oldest expression she'd ever seen on a face that looked 32. The weariness of someone who has been alone for so long that the presence of another person in his room feels like a foreign language he's trying to remember. I can see the face, she said. Quietly. The person who sits in the chair. He opened his eyes. You said you couldn't. I lied. The silence stretched. The candles guttered. Tell me, he said. I can't. Why? Because it would change things. Change what? Whether it's real, he looked at her. She looked at him. She was sitting in his chair, wrapped in his blanket, in the room where he'd been alone for 47 years. And the candlelight made her skin warm and gold and alive in a way that nothing in his world had been for a very long time. Your hand is cold, she said. It's always cold. She reached out and took it anyway. His fingers were cold in a way that went deeper than temperature. The chill of something that hadn't had a heartbeat in 7 centuries. Her hand was warm. The contrast was sharp and strange, and neither of them let go. I'm sitting in your chair, she said. Yes. With your blanket? Yes. And I'm holding your hand? Yes. Are you going to ask me the real question? He looked at her hand in his, at the warmth of her against the cold of him, at the worn cushion underneath her and the blue blanket around her shoulders, and the candlelight making her eyes bright and human and unbearably alive. Not yet, he said. She squeezed his hand. Smart. He almost smiled. Almost. The muscle at the corner of his mouth shifted a fraction of a degree, and she saw it and she knew, from her powers and from her eyes and from the place in her chest where knowing someone is different from seeing their future, that he was already gone. He just hadn't realized it yet. Chapter 4. The Price of Seeing. Elsie found Isolde on the morning of the 4th day, in the kitchen, eating toast. She'd made it herself. She was, she realized, the only person in the building who ate toast. She was possibly the only person in the building who ate at all. Miss Barrowmere. Elsie was tall, silver-haired, and had the kind of beauty that came from being 40 for 300 years. She moved like someone who had been important for a very long time and had gotten bored of proving it. Elsie. Isolde put down her toast. You're real. I get that a lot lately. I don't mean it as a compliment. Elsie sat down across from her. She moved a chair with the casual precision of someone who had been sitting in rooms of power for longer than Isolde's entire family tree. A genuine psychic in a room full of vampire diplomats is not a curiosity, Miss Barrowmere. It's a liability. I'm not a liability. I'm a contractor. You told the Birch Court delegate about the trade amendment before the session opened. You told Counselor Morrow about her estate manager. You've been giving readings that contain actual, verifiable intelligence. Elsie leaned forward. Do you understand what that means? It means people should probably tip better. It means you're the most valuable person in this building, and the most vulnerable. Isolde's toast went cold in her hand. Every court in Europe would want you, Elsie said. Some would want to use you. Others would want to ensure no one else could. Your gift makes you a strategic asset, and strategic assets in the vampire world do not retire quietly. I'm a human being, not a strategic asset. In this world, those are not mutually exclusive. Elsie's eyes were old, genuinely old, the kind of old that had seen the math on people like Isolde and done the calculation without sentiment. I'm offering you protection. Come with the Ivory Court. We have resources. Infrastructure. Nikolai Winterborn is a good man, but he's one king in one territory, and he does not understand what you are. And you do? I understand that you're in danger, and that sitting in his study wrapped in his blanket does not constitute a security plan. Isolde went cold. Not the cold of fear, the cold of someone who has seen too many futures to be surprised, but is still occasionally hurt by the present. Thank you, she said. I'll think about it. Think quickly. The summit ends tomorrow. Elsie left. Isolde sat in the kitchen with cold toast and a vision she couldn't shake. Herself, cold-skinned and still, sitting in the chair without the blanket. She'd seen it twice now. The future kept showing it to her. She kept pushing it away. But Elsie was right about one thing. A mortal psychic in a vampire world was fragile. One wrong court, one hungry elder, one political calculation, and fragile things break. The vision flickered again. Her own hands, pale and still, no heartbeat, no warmth. She looked at her warm hands on the kitchen table. She looked at the cold toast. Not yet, she said to nobody. Not yet. She didn't tell Nikolai about the conversation. She didn't need to. He found out from Dylan, who found out from a member of the catering staff who had overheard it while restocking the breadbasket. She wants to take you? Nikolai was pacing. He had been pacing for 6 minutes. Isolde knew this because she was counting, and because she'd already seen this conversation in a vision 3 hours ago and had been dreading it. She wants to protect me. She wants to own you. That's your interpretation. That's the accurate interpretation. The Ivory Court doesn't protect things, they collect them. Nikolai. You're not going. He stopped pacing. His eyes were silver dark again, the predator register, and his voice had dropped to the register she'd learned meant the centuries of composure were being held together with something that looked like control, but was actually desperation. You're not going with the Ivory Court. I know. You need to leave. Go home. Get out of the vampire world entirely. I'll arrange transport. Dylan will. Nikolai. Handle the logistics. You'll be home by morning. I'll pay for. Benedict. He stopped. She stood up from the kitchen table. She was smaller than him by a full head. She was human, mortal, warm, and she had exactly 0 centuries of diplomatic training. She looked up at him and said, I already knew you were going to say that. Then you know I'm right. I know you're afraid. There's a difference. The muscle at his jaw went tight. I'm not afraid. I'm being strategic. You're pacing. You've been pacing for 6 minutes. You pace when you're scared. You paced for 3 hours the night I told you about the chair. He stared at her. You can see that? I don't need powers for that either. You wear a track in the carpet. He looked down. There was, in fact, a faint line in the carpet where his path had worn the pile thinner. I'm not leaving, she said. I already saw what happens if you send me away. You pace for 40 minutes, then you come find me. We're going to skip the pacing. I could choose not to come find you. You could, she paused. You won't. You don't know that. Nikolai, I literally see the future. I know that. The future is not fixed. The future where you come find me has been fixed since the moment you hired a psychic from Craigslist. The universe has a sense of humor. I should know, I can see most of it. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. He paced for 40 minutes, Dylan timed it. He did not tell Nikolai he was timing it. He simply stood in the corridor with his watch and waited, because 400 years of service had taught him that some things needed to be witnessed, even if no one asked. At minute 37, Nikolai stopped pacing and stood at the window and did not breathe for 3 minutes. At minute 40, he walked to the East Salon. Dylan put his watch away. She was in the East Salon, sitting in a chair by the cold fireplace, reading a book she'd found in his library, a first edition of something she probably shouldn't be touching without gloves. She didn't look up when he came in. You could have warned me about the pacing, he said. I did warn you. You could have warned me harder. She put down the book. Nikolai, the woman who sits in your chair is not going to be driven away by Elsie. Or by you. He heard it. What she just said. The woman who sits in his chair. Is it you? He asked. Very quiet. The managed register was gone. 700 years of composure, and what was left was just a man standing in a doorway, asking. She didn't answer. But she didn't look away. You said you couldn't see the face. I said I lied. You lied. Yes. You've known. Since the first reading.
Since you touched my hand.
Yes. The silence in the room was the kind only a vampire could create. The total absence of involuntary sound, no breath, no heartbeat, just the stillness of something that had been alive for 700 years and was currently experiencing a feeling it had not experienced in a very long time. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to get there on your own. If I'd told you, it would have been a prophecy. Something to fulfill or fight against. This way, she paused. This way, it's just you, choosing. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her chair. He was very close and very still and very cold, and she could feel the ancient weight of him, the centuries of restraint. The predator that lived behind the gray eyes that were looking at her like she was the most impossible thing he had seen in 700 years of impossible things. You're sitting in my chair, he said. I know. You have my blanket. I know. You lied to me about the face. I know. He reached down and took her hand. His fingers were cold, hers were warm. The contrast was the same as it always was, sharp, strange, a reminder that one of them was alive in a way the other hadn't been for centuries. I'm going to ask you the real question now, he said. I know that too. Stay. It wasn't a question. It was a request from someone who had forgotten how to ask. She stood up. She was very close to him. She could feel the cold radiating from his skin, the stillness of his chest where a heartbeat should have been. I was already staying, she said. He kissed her. It was the kitchen, the electric-lit, toast-crumbed human kitchen, and he kissed her there because it was the warmest room in the house, and she was the warmest thing in his world. And her lips were warm, and his were cold, and the contrast was everything that had been building since she'd taken his hand in the study, and gone white, and told him he was going to fall in love. She pulled back. Her eyes were bright. "You're going to get better at that," she said. "I've had 700 years of practice." "Not with me." He almost smiled. The real one. "No," he said. "Not with you." "Good." She touched his face. Her fingers were warm against the cold line of his jaw. "Because I can see the next one, and it's better." "How much better?" "Significantly." "You're not going to tell me when." "Where's the fun in that?" "I have existed for 700 years without fun." "I know. That's about to change." Chapter 5. The Future. The summit's closing ceremony was a formal affair, which meant candles, stone, 6 centuries of protocol, and a seating chart that Dylan had revised 14 times. "You look like you're going to be sick," Dylan told Isolde, handing her a glass of water in the gallery. "I can see everything that's about to happen, and I'm choosing not to say any of it." "Is it bad?" "It's complicated. In my experience, complicated and bad are synonyms." He straightened his cuffs. "The dress suits you, by the way." "You picked it." "I picked something appropriate. You made it suitable. There is a difference." She held the water glass and watched the assembled delegations file in. Elsie was seated in the ivory court section, watching Nikolai with the calm focus of someone who was about to find out what kind of king he was. Nikolai stood. The room went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of attention, the deep quiet that 700 years of authority creates, the kind where the silence itself has weight. "Before we conclude," he said, and his voice carried the full register of a king who has been managing diplomatic crises since before the invention of the electric light. "There is one matter to address." He looked at Isolde. She looked back at him. She already knew what he was going to say. She'd seen it. But seeing a thing and hearing someone choose to say it were different, and the difference was everything. The psychic consultant engaged for this summit, Miss Isolde Barrowmere, has demonstrated gifts that are genuine, verified, and I am now able to confirm, deeply inconvenient. A murmur. She almost laughed. "These gifts are not the property of any court, territory, or delegation. They are hers. She is not an asset, a resource, or a strategic acquisition." His eyes found Elsie. "She is a person, and she is under the protection of House Winterbourne." The murmur became a hum. Political calculations happening in real time across 6 centuries of vampire diplomacy. Elsie stood. The room held its breath, the ones who breathed anyway. "The ivory court acknowledges the declaration," she said. Her voice was cool and measured and carried 300 years of knowing exactly when to concede. "We wish Miss Barrowmere well." She paused. "And we remind Lord Winterbourne that protection is a responsibility, not merely a proclamation." "I'm aware," Nikolai said. "Are you?" Because the last king who declared personal protection over a human had to defend that claim for 30 years. "I have time." A small ripple through the room. Not laughter, recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when an immortal creature says, "I have time," and means it in a way no mortal ever could. Elsie inclined her head. It was, Isolde realized, respect. Not agreement, not surrender. Just the acknowledgement of someone who has watched enough centuries to know when a decision has already been made. She sat down. It was done. Isolde's hands were shaking in her lap. She pressed them flat against her knees. Nikolai found her eyes across the room. She held his gaze. She wanted to tell him she'd seen this moment, that she'd known he would do this, that the vision of him standing in front of 6 courts and choosing her had been the clearest thing she'd ever seen. But some things were better left unsaid. Some things were worth hearing without knowing they were coming. "Thank you," she mouthed. He inclined his head, a fraction. The kind of acknowledgement that carried 700 years of things he would never say in front of a room full of vampires, but that she could read in the set of his jaw and the way his hand, at his side, was perfectly, deliberately still. Afterward, in the emptying hall, Dylan appeared at Isolde's elbow. "That was politically expensive," he said. "I know. Several delegations will interpret his declaration as a sign of personal attachment." "It is a sign of personal attachment." "Yes, but they'll interpret it correctly, which is worse." She looked at him. "Are you worried?" Dylan's expression was the same expression it had been for 400 years, the carefully calibrated neutrality of a man who has seen everything go wrong and has learned to treat it as a scheduling conflict. "I am never worried, Miss Barrowmere. I am occasionally scheduling adjacent to concern." "That's the most Dylan thing you've ever said." "I have had 400 years to refine my vocabulary. One develops precision." He straightened an invisible crease in his jacket. "For what it is worth, I believe you are good for him. He has not replaced a cushion that quickly in 47 years. You noticed the cushion." "I notice everything. It is, as you might say, my whole thing." She laughed. It was the first real laugh she'd had all day, and Dylan heard it. And something in his expression shifted in the way that very old things shift, slowly, carefully, like a door opening after a long time closed. That night, the study, the candles, the chair. She was sitting in it. He was standing by the window. The moon was up and the light caught the angles of his face and made him look exactly what he was, beautiful and ancient, and not quite the same species as the woman in his chair. "I need to ask you something," she said. "You already know what I'll say. That's not how this works. I see futures. I don't choose them. And some questions are worth hearing out loud, even when you already know the answer." He turned from the window. "Then ask." She'd been thinking about it since she first touched his hand, since the vision hit her like a wave and she saw the centuries stretching out in front of him, since she understood, in the space of one reading, what it meant to love something that would outlast her by 600 years. The turning question. He went still, not the managed stillness, the real kind, the kind that came from 700 years of losing people and learning that the question underneath every love story between a vampire and a mortal is the same question. How long? "I've seen what happens," she said, "about the turning." "You've seen my answer?" "I've seen mine." He waited. She could count the seconds by the absence of his heartbeat. "I've been seeing it since the first night," she said. "Since the feeding. Since you left the room and I sat in this chair and the vision hit me. I saw myself, here, in this room, cold, still, no heartbeat." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to." "Let me finish." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I saw myself without this, without the warmth, without the heartbeat you listen to when you think I'm not paying attention, without the warm hands. I saw the thing you love about me, the alive part, the mortal part, the part that makes me different from everything in your world, gone. Isolde." And I kept pushing the vision away, for days, because losing that felt like losing the thing that makes us work. Her voice was steady, her eyes were not. "The temperature contrast, the warm hand in the cold one. That's us. That's the whole story. Cold king, warm psychic, and the difference between them is everything." He didn't speak. His hand on the floor beside her chair was perfectly, absolutely still. "But I kept seeing the other vision too," she said. "The one where I don't turn. The one where I grow old, where you watch me grow old. Where you replace the cushion on this chair every year, and every year I weigh a little less on it. Where one day the chair is empty, and you replace the cushion anyway because you can't stop." His eyes closed. The muscle at his jaw worked once, hard. "I've seen both futures, Nikolai, and the one where I stay warm and alive and mortal ends with you alone in this room for another 400 years, and I am not doing that to you. I refuse. This is not your decision to make for me. It's not for you, it's for me." She let go of the blanket. I want to stay. Not for a decade, not for a lifetime. I want to stay. I want to sit in this chair and argue with you about cats and burn toast and see futures and hold your cold hand, and I want to do it for longer than one human life allows. The turning is painful, he said. His voice was raw. It takes days. There's a real chance of… I know, I've seen it. You've seen it? I see everything, Nikolai. I've seen the pain and the days and the risk and the part where Dylan paces the corridor for 72 hours and refuses to eat. She paused. He's going to be fine, by the way. He stress organizes the wine cellar. This isn't… He stood up. He was pacing. He was pacing, and she could see the track in the carpet, and she could see the next 40 minutes of his life, and she waited. He stopped. He turned. He looked at her. You'll lose the warmth, he said. Your hands will be cold. I know. I won't be able to hear your heartbeat. I know. The reason I… He stopped. 700 years of vocabulary, and he could not find the words. You are the warmest thing in my world. If you turn, that's gone. I can't get it back. Neither can you. I know. She stood up. She crossed the room to him. She took his cold hand in her warm one, and she held it, and she looked up at him. But you know what I'll still have? What? The chair. The blanket. Gregory. The visions. You. She squeezed his hand. And you know what you'll have? What? Time. With me. Actual time, not a countdown. He looked at her hand in his, warm and cold, the last time it would feel like this. When? He asked, very quiet. After the toast, she said. I want to eat toast one more time as someone who can taste it. And then I want to stay. He kissed her forehead. His lips were cold against her warm skin. The last time the contrast would feel like this, and they both knew it. And neither of them looked away. You're sure? He said. I've seen the future, Nikolai. All of them. Every version. And the one where I'm sitting in this chair in 100 years, cold-handed and arguing with you about a cat, is the only one I want. He pulled her close. She was warm against him. She would not always be. Then we have time, he said. Yes, she said. We do. He crossed the room. He sat down beside the chair, not in a chair, beside hers, on the floor, which was the most undignified thing he had done in 7 centuries, and she saw it for what it was. A king on the ground beside a mortal woman who had chosen to become what he was, because the distance between them was still too much, and she had decided to close it permanently. You're on the floor, she said. I'm aware. A 700-year-old vampire king is sitting on the floor of his own study. Would you prefer I stand? No. She reached down and touched his hair. It was dark and cold and fine. I'd prefer you stay. I'm staying. I know. I've seen it. 3 weeks later, a gray tabby appeared on the estate grounds. Nobody knew where it came from. Dylan checked the perimeter. The ground staff checked the gardens. The cat had simply materialized, the way cats do, with the unerring certainty of an animal that has already decided where it lives and does not consider human or vampire opinion relevant to the decision. It walked through the front door. It walked past 4 vampires, a set of 17th-century carpets, and a portrait of Nikolai's predecessor. It climbed the stairs. It found the study. It jumped on his desk. It knocked over his inkwell. It looked at him with the profound indifference of a creature that had never once in its short life considered the feelings of others. Absolutely not, Nikolai said. Isolde walked in, saw the cat, and sat down in her chair. She moved differently now. Quieter, more still. Her skin was pale where it had been warm, luminous where it had been warm-toned, and her dark brown eyes, the same eyes, she'd been relieved about the eyes, were a shade deeper than they'd been before, ringed faintly with something that caught candlelight like amber. The turning had taken 4 days. Dylan had paced the corridor for 72 hours and reorganized the wine cellar by vintage, region, and mood. Nikolai had not left her side. She'd told him he wouldn't. She'd been right. The pain had been exactly as bad as she'd seen in the vision. She'd known that. Knowing didn't help. But he'd held her hand through all of it, and his hand wasn't cold to her anymore. It was the same temperature as hers, which was different and strange, and took some getting used to, like hearing a song in a new key. "Gregory," she said. "I'm not naming it Gregory." "You're already naming it Gregory. The cat has been here for 30 seconds. And you've already looked at it twice with the expression you use when something has become your problem permanently." She wrapped the blanket around herself. She didn't need the blanket anymore. She kept it anyway. "Welcome to the rest of your life." He looked at the cat. The cat purred. It was a sound he had not heard in his study in 47 years of silence. "Gregory," he said, very quietly, and the cat purred louder, and Isolde laughed, and the sound of her laughter was different now. Not warmer or colder, just different. The way a voice changes when the body carrying it has been remade. And he listened to it the way a man who has been in the dark listens to the first sound of morning. From the doorway, Dylan observed the scene. His employer on the floor with an inkwell-toppling cat, a newly turned psychic in the chair with the blue blanket she no longer needed, candlelight making everything warm. "Shall I cancel the Craigslist posting, sir?" he said. "Or are we still interviewing?" Nikolai didn't look away from her. "I believe the position has been filled, Dylan." "Very good, sir. I'll update the listing." Dylan. "Sir?" "Thank you. For the notice board." Dylan's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Something 400 years old and loyal and quietly, cautiously hopeful. "It was a very professional listing, sir. 4.7 stars. "Yes," Nikolai said. He was looking at Isolde. She was looking at Gregory. Gregory was looking at the inkwell with calculating intent. "Yes," he said again, quieter. "It was." The cushion on the chair was new. He'd replaced it that morning. She'd told him he would. Gregory knocked the inkwell off the desk again. Isolde caught it without looking up from her book. Faster than she could have caught it before. That was new too. "You saw that coming," Nikolai said. "I see everything coming." She put the inkwell back. "That's my whole thing." "Is it always like this?" "Like what?" "Knowing what happens next." She looked at him. Gregory purred between them. The candles burned. The blanket was around her shoulders, not for warmth, just for the memory of warmth, and for the fact that he'd ordered it from Edinburgh when she still needed it. And some things you keep not because you need them, but because someone gave them to you before you changed. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, cold and cold. The same temperature for the first time. The contrast that had defined them was gone, and in its place was something else, not better or worse, just different. Like hearing a song in a new key and realizing it was always supposed to sound like this. "Not always," she said. "Sometimes I just sit in a chair and hold someone's hand and don't look ahead at all." She squeezed his fingers. "We have time." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She already knew. She was always right. He was beginning to think that wasn't the inconvenience he'd assumed.